partes. Quiero iniciar mencionando que este encuentro no sería posible sin la organización y la protesta de las mujeres, de las colectivas feministas, dentro y fuera de nuestras universidades, a lo largo de todo el país. A ellas, primeramente, reconocer su labor y su lucha por la igualdad de género y por una vida libre de violencia para todas las mujeres. Las universidades son también los espacios donde se reproduce la desigualdad y las violencias, pues no están desvinculadas de todos los demás espacios de la sociedad. Sin embargo, destaco que las universidades también son el espacio más importante de todas las sociedades, hechas para reflexionar, generar conocimientos y conciencia crítica, el cuestionarnos a nosotros mismos y el mundo en que vivimos para pensar mundos mejores y estar en posibilidades de reconstruirnos hacia espacios más igualitarios, menos violentos, plurales y respetuosos de convivencia y ante la generación y la aplicación de conocimientos. Esta coordinación para la igualdad de género de la UNAM, donde hoy tengo el gusto de ser su titular, fue creada en marzo del 2020. En aquella ocasión, el mensaje del rector Enrique Graue a las mujeres universitarias señaló que la coordinación tiene entre sus funciones diseñar e instrumentar de manera continua acciones estratégicas orientadas a la prevención de la violencia de género y propiciar y lograr la igualdad a partir de los lineamientos generales para la igualdad de género en la UNAM. Trabajar con la transformación de las masculinidades es trabajar con el núcleo del engranaje que compone las violencias de género, razón por la cual esta coordinación cuenta, entre otros, con el programa integral de trabajo con hombres como línea de acción, y su objetivo es construir procesos de reflexión crítica sobre los mandatos culturales de la masculinidad que conduzcan a la transformación subjetiva de los hombres universitarios, con miras a reconocer y eliminar las distintas formas de desigualdad, de discriminación y violencia de género en la UNAM, y así propiciar la participación activa como agentes de cambio en la búsqueda de la igualdad sustantiva de género en la UNAM y en todas las sociedades. Estas líneas de acción que plantea la coordinación de la UNAM se articulan mediante 4 ejes. Trabajo focalizado con hombres que han ejercido violencia en la UNAM. Acción comunitaria preventiva con hombres a través de círculos de reflexión. Impulso de la corresponsabilidad de los hombres en el trabajo de cuidados. Promoción de la igualdad de género con hombres. Y es en este 4º eje en el que se enmarca justo lo que hoy estamos iniciando, que es el Encuentro Interuniversitario sobre hombres y masculinidades. Durante el 2020, la Coordinación para la Igualdad de Género de la UNAM realizó diagnósticos cualitativos en los que se identificaron percepciones por parte de los hombres universitarios, tanto del sector académico como estudiantil. Algunos hallazgos fueron que se identificó una percepción generalizada en ellos de tener dificultad para hablar de violencia de género desde la primera persona. Yo soy, yo tengo. Perciben que al ser identificados como hombres, de forma generalizada son vistos como agresores. Dijeron sentir empatía hacia la demanda de la erradicación de la violencia de género y también expresaron desacuerdo en relación con algunas formas de protesta de las mujeres organizadas en la universidad, no logran comprenderlas. Observan la presencia de un discurso sobre las falsas acusaciones hacia hombres inocentes. Manifiestan dificultad para saber qué hacer, cómo conducirse y cómo participar en los procesos de transformación para la igualdad. Y se dan cuenta que la problemática de la violencia de género es no solo de género, sino generacional. Entonces, este encuentro interuniversitario sobre hombres y masculinidades nace como línea de acción a emprender en las universidades a partir de estas percepciones y de múltiples bases de datos y cifras que indican los niveles de violencia de género y su normalización, donde los hombres son parte de este problema. Este encuentro interuniversitario busca crear espacios de reflexión crítica sobre la masculinidad, las violencias y los privilegios machistas que se reproducen en las universidades, así como sobre las apuestas de transformación que los hombres estudiantes, los académicos, los trabajadores administrativos pueden asumir para constituirse en agentes de cambio a favor de la igualdad de género en sus comunidades. Cabe mencionar que de todos los eventos que ha realizado esta coordinación para la igualdad de género, este es donde más participación de los hombres hemos logrado. Tenemos un registro alrededor de 2.200 asistentes hasta el día de ayer, donde el 46% son hombres. En este encuentro se realizarán 12 actividades abiertas al público en general y más de 10 actividades optativas de profundización entre círculos de reflexión, talleres y otros espacios de diálogo durante 6 jueves a partir de hoy. No omito invitarles a que se sumen a las actividades y a reflexionar sobre la importancia de que los hombres se vean a sí mismos y no solo como parte del problema, sino también como parte de la solución. Ya es ineludible transformar la masculinidad hegemónica y el orden patriarcal. Porque como lo ha dicho Rita Segato, el reconocer que si las mujeres de una sociedad no están bien, entonces la sociedad completa no está bien. Este encuentro es un esfuerzo de la participación de 7 instituciones de educación superior, a quienes reconozco sus compromisos por la igualdad de género y erradicación de la violencia. A la Benemérita Universidad Autónoma de Puebla, a la Universidad Veracruzana, a la Universidad Autónoma Benito Juárez de Oaxaca, a la Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro, a la Universidad de Guanajuato, a la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana Unidad Coajimalpa y por supuesto a la UNAM. Por ello, ahora me permito ceder la voz a las y los rectores de estas instituciones de educación superior, quienes darán un mensaje a manera de inauguración. Muchas gracias.
Es para mí un gusto saludarles y darles la bienvenida a este encuentro en donde confluimos 7 universidades públicas que apostamos por una educación basada en el respeto, la igualdad de género y la erradicación de todo tipo de violencias. Celebro que se abran este tipo de espacios que alientan a una profunda reflexión crítica sobre la masculinidad, las violencias y los privilegios machistas que se reproducen en la sociedad y que también están presentes en nuestras instituciones. Debemos combatir estereotipos y construir una nueva sociedad. En la UAPJO creemos firmemente en ello y por eso en la administración que encabezo hemos realizado diversas acciones como cursos y talleres sobre las nuevas masculinidades, el uso del lenguaje incluyente y el más importante, el protocolo para la prevención, atención, erradicación, discriminación, hostigamiento, acoso sexual y la violencia en contra de las mujeres. Falta mucho por hacer, pero sin duda estamos dando pasos para cambiar y que las universidades y las sociedades sean espacios de respeto e igualdad de oportunidades para todas y todos. Gracias.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Mi nombre es Teresa García Gasca, rectora de la Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro, y quiero saludar con mucho gusto a todo el grupo de trabajo de este Encuentro Interuniversitario de Hombres y Masculinidades, un tema importantísimo para ir transitando en este proceso de la igualdad de género, en donde yo estoy convencida de que el papel de los hombres es importantísimo a través del reconocimiento de sus masculinidades y de las relaciones positivas entre hombres y mujeres. Muchas felicidades a todo el grupo de trabajo. Gracias por este evento y desde la UAC aquí estamos para apoyarles. Felicidades.
Es un honor poder darles la bienvenida a este encuentro interuniversitario sobre hombres y masculinidades. Estoy convencido de que cada vez que hablamos de violencia de género en el ámbito universitario, tenemos que empezar por reconocer, por lamentar y por disculparnos de estas formas de violencia que aún persisten en nuestras instituciones. Es cierto que cada día hay más ejemplos de la tolerancia cero que estas conductas merecen, pero es cierto también que el problema no reside ni termina cuando todos los casos sean tratados con la misma severidad, sino cuando se logren erradicar otras manifestaciones de esa violencia que lo mismo se escenifican en la estructura de nuestras instalaciones que en nuestras formas de relación, en la composición de nuestras comunidades o en las expectativas que cada persona puede hacerse dentro de ellas. Es en ese contexto que la reflexión sobre la masculinidad resulta sumamente importante, pues más allá de su toxicidad, permite evidenciar el papel estructurante que la violencia de género tiene en la sociedad, tal y como la conocemos hasta ahora. Les agradezco profundamente el honor de participar en este evento y les deseo la mejor de las suertes. Gracias.
El encuentro interdisciplinario, hombres y masculinidades contra la violencia y privilegios machistas en las universidades, pone de manifiesto la necesidad de que las instituciones educativas entablemos marcos de colaboración para atender asuntos y problemas prioritarios que atañen a nuestras casas de estudios. Además, este encuentro también pone de relieve el imperativo ético institucional que tenemos las casas de estudio para que estos asuntos, estos problemas, los atendamos, además de la profundidad desde la perspectiva académica, a la vista de la necesidad de generar políticas públicas en el entorno universitario. Nuestro reconocimiento a la UNAM por esta iniciativa y también a las instituciones hermanas que participan en este gran proyecto. En nombre de la comunidad universitaria de la Universidad de Guanajuato, agradecemos la oportunidad de participar en este encuentro.
En nombre de la Universidad Veracruzana, la casa de estudios que me honro en presidir, les doy a todas y a todos ustedes la más cálida y entusiasta bienvenida a este encuentro interuniversitario sobre hombres y masculinidades contra las violencias y los privilegios machistas en las universidades. Acompaño mi bienvenida de una breve reflexión. Retomando las enseñanzas que la historia nos ha dejado, estoy convencida de que la violencia y los privilegios machistas de que gozan los hombres al interior de nuestra sociedad son el resultado de la construcción hegemónica de la masculinidad, de una masculinidad que se ha sostenido y perpetuado a lo largo de prácticamente todas las etapas por las que ha atravesado el ser humano, en un largo y accidentado proceso en el que sin lugar a dudas se cruzan naturaleza humana y cultura. Es en esta masculinidad, o mejor dicho, en este tipo específico de masculinidad, en el que nos educamos todas y todos por igual y en el que en general se educa el núcleo familiar, se trate del padre o la madre, el hijo o la hija. Y es este tipo específico de masculinidad que se reproduce al interior de los numerosos y variados espacios sociales en los que el ser humano se desenvuelve. Los centros de trabajo, los medios de información y comunicación, los ambientes culturales y lamentablemente los espacios educativos en todos sus niveles, desde el nivel primario hasta el nivel profesional. Lamentablemente, a lo largo de la historia, la masculinidad hegemónica se ha construido sobre la base del enfrentamiento, la agresión, la violencia que el hombre ha ejercido y sigue ejerciendo en contra de la mujer en todas sus variantes, física, emocional, psicológica. El daño en vidas humanas en que este hecho se ha traducido es elevado, doloroso, insostenible. Ha llegado el momento de hacerle frente, de ponerle un alto, de construir otro tipo de masculinidad, basado en primer lugar en la crítica y la autocrítica, y luego en el diálogo, el respeto, la empatía y la solidaridad. Creo que lo que no debemos de perder de vista entonces es que estamos ante un problema histórico, estructural, social y cultural que cruza prácticamente todas las instancias humanas y sociales habidas y por haber. Creo en ese sentido que no se trata de levantar otro tipo de masculinidad a partir de la confrontación hombre contra mujer, sino a partir de la confrontación hombre y mujer contra el tipo de masculinidad hegemónica, el que ha posibilitado la violencia y los privilegios machistas de que hoy gozan los hombres. Estoy segura de que este encuentro interuniversitario sobre hombres y masculinidades sabrá construirse en un paso firme y colaborativo en ese sentido. Sean todas y todos muy bienvenidos y muchas gracias.
Rectores y rectoras de las instituciones de educación superior, convocadas a este encuentro. Doctora Tamara Martínez, coordinadora para la igualdad de género de la UNAM. Todas y todos sabemos y entendemos las razones por las que estamos aquí. Nuestra sociedad patriarcal ha incubado y cultivado los privilegios hacia los hombres y ha tolerado, a veces en forma velada y en muchas ocasiones de forma descarada, la violencia hacia las mujeres. Si bien es cierto que nuestras instituciones son el reflejo de la sociedad en la que vivimos, también lo es que en nosotros está la obligación de construir ciudadanías y que éstas deben cambiar, porque ya no pueden ser así. El tema que nos convoca tiene un origen claro: la legítima organización y protesta de grupos feministas de nuestras universidades ante diversas problemáticas que son urgentes de resolver. A esto se suma que históricamente diferentes grupos de hombres han sido ajenos a la lucha feminista por la igualdad y por la erradicación de la violencia de género. Por ello debemos trabajar con los hombres que forman parte de los espacios y dinámicas universitarias, tanto con estudiantes como con académicos y trabajadores. Debemos construir espacios seguros y libres de violencia para las mujeres, ya que es la única forma de mejorar sustantivamente el bienestar de nuestras comunidades y de nuestras sociedades. En la UNAM, en marzo del año pasado, se creó la Coordinación para la Igualdad de Género, que ha desarrollado un diagnóstico sobre masculinidades y violencia. Sus resultados más significativos son que de las casi 1.500 quejas que se han presentado en los últimos 4 años por distintos tipos de violencia, el 95% de los casos, la agresión provino de los hombres. Y a pesar de las distintas convocatorias a la participación de hombres en actividades de sensibilización y formación de masculinidades, la participación de ellos es inferior al 30%. Aún tomando en cuenta que entre los varones existe empatía hacia la demanda de la erradicación de la violencia de género. Pero también tenemos bien identificado que los hombres presentamos dificultades para hablar sobre violencia de género y para comprender la dimensión generacional en la problemática de este tipo de violencias. A partir de ese diagnóstico, nos hemos enfocado en diseñar programas dirigidos a procesos de reflexión crítica. Se desarrollaron, por ejemplo, los lineamientos para un modelo integral de trabajo con hombres en la UNAM, que buscan lograr el reconocimiento de responsabilidades y la renuncia de privilegios. Pero habrá que hacer mucho más. Hoy lo que nos convoca aquí, a todos nosotros, es sumar voces, propuestas, investigaciones y experiencias para construir en nuestras instituciones una igualdad real en materia de género y entender que existen condiciones, aspiraciones y necesidades distintas que debemos resolver. De ahí la importancia de crear espacios de esta naturaleza para crear la reflexión crítica sobre y con los hombres, porque es una tarea esta que no se puede ni debe ya esperar. Yo quiero extender un agradecimiento y un reconocimiento a las rectoras y a los rectores que nos acompañan. Y por supuesto, a las y los activistas y expertos que participan en este esfuerzo. Hagamos esto bien, con gran entusiasmo, y hagámoslo porque es justo, porque es necesario y porque es impostergable. Muchas gracias y déjenme concluir como concluye habitualmente el rector de la universidad. Por mi raza debe hablar ese espíritu. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, pues a manera de inauguración, estos son los mensajes que nos otorgan las rectoras y los rectores de las universidades que colaboran y que participan para lograr este evento. Y permítanme dejarle la palabra al doctor Benno de Keijzer. Él es catedrático, profesor investigador del Instituto de Salud Pública de la Universidad de Veracruz. También es miembro fundador de Cómplices por la Igualdad y hoy trabaja en apoyo en una estancia de investigación y operativa dentro de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, con nosotros en la coordinación. Benno, te dejo la palabra para que continúes con el evento. Sean todos y todas bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Tamara. Muchísimas gracias, rectores y rectoras, por esta introducción. Antes de presentar a nuestro conferencista, quiero compartir con ustedes un posicionamiento que decidimos redactar que permite entender desde dónde es que estamos planteando no solo este encuentro, sino el trabajo con hombres en las universidades. Encuentro Interuniversitario sobre hombres y masculinidades contra los privilegios y las violencias machistas en las universidades. El posicionamiento inicia con una frase que nos regala José Ángel Lozoya, quien es de los hombres que empezó a convocar a otros hombres en España ya hace varias décadas para manifestarse en contra de la violencia hacia las mujeres. Y él dice, la violencia de género es un problema de los hombres que afecta a las mujeres. Esa es la frase que nos ayuda también a inspirarnos en este tipo de trabajo. El posicionamiento dice lo siguiente: la energía transformadora de los movimientos feministas y de mujeres organizadas en las universidades ha puesto sobre la agenda de nuestras instituciones la demanda impostergable de erradicar todas las formas de violencia, discriminación y desigualdad por motivos de género que se reproducen en nuestras comunidades. El momento histórico que vivimos nos convoca a tomar responsabilidad sobre los cambios normativos y estructurales que requerimos para lograrlo, al mismo tiempo que nos insta a imaginar y construir nuevas relaciones de género que se organicen desde la crítica, la diversidad, la ética del cuidado, el amor comunitario y el rechazo a la opresión. Quienes convocamos a este encuentro reconocemos que la transformación cultural de los hombres y de los modelos de masculinidad es una asignatura pendiente, porque desde una mirada relacional, sus formas hegemónicas tienen un estrecho vínculo con la producción de desigualdades que afectan a las mujeres, a las diversidades sexogenéricas y a los hombres mismos. El orden de género oprime, jerarquiza, segrega, excluye y, como se ha evidenciado recientemente, produce daños en la integración comunitaria de todos los sectores universitarios, al mismo tiempo que crea divisiones que nos alejan de la posibilidad de cumplir nuestras funciones sustantivas desde lugares que reconozcan e incorporen el potencial y las aportaciones de todas las personas. Durante todos los jueves, desde hoy hasta el 3 de junio, este encuentro interuniversitario, organizado por un grupo plural de integrantes de la Universidad Autónoma de México, la Benemérita Universidad Autónoma de Puebla, la Universidad Veracruzana, las Universidades Autónomas Benito Juárez de Oaxaca, de Querétaro, de Guanajuato y la Autónoma Metropolitana Unidad Coajimalpa, buscará crear espacios de reflexión crítica sobre las masculinidades, las violencias y los privilegios machistas que se reproducen en las mismas, así como sobre las apuestas de transformación que los hombres, estudiantes, académicos y trabajadores administrativos pueden asumir para constituirse en agentes de cambio a favor de la igualdad de género en sus comunidades. Sabemos que los hombres somos un grupo social diverso, con diferencias notables en cuanto a nuestros posicionamientos y nuestras prácticas, con contrastes desde la resistencia al cambio hasta el activismo por la igualdad. Si bien reconocemos que hasta ahora no han existido procesos colectivos lo suficientemente amplios para interpelar de manera sistemática los mandatos de la masculinidad, tanto a nivel de las universidades como de la sociedad en conjunto, buscamos desde la reflexión caminar y acompañarnos en esa dirección. Por el contexto en que nos encontramos, entendemos las reacciones que esta iniciativa pueda despertar entre quienes miran con escepticismo la perspectiva crítica de las masculinidades. Sin embargo, tendemos el brazo y la escucha para dialogar con quienes decidan sumarse. Nuestro lenguaje común son los derechos humanos y la igualdad de género, en concordancia con la legislación mexicana en la materia, así como las directrices de trabajo con hombres planteadas ya desde las conferencias internacionales, como la del Cairo en el 94 y Beijing del 95 del siglo pasado. Si podemos formular una meta, esperamos que este encuentro interuniversitario articule un diálogo colectivo que muestre los beneficios de construir un mundo desde la igualdad para todas, todos y todes. En tanto que los hombres somos parte del problema, es hora de que nos convirtamos en parte de la solución. México, abril 2021. Con esto, repito, esta bienvenida que damos a todo el público que se ha ido reuniendo, tanto en el Zoom, como en YouTube, como en la página de Facebook, no solo de la UNAM, sino de las otras universidades que están también compartiendo la señal. Y con viva emoción de que ya arrancamos este evento, recibimos y agradecemos la presencia de Michael Kaufman, nuestro conferencista magistral, que abre esta serie de jueves de aquí hasta junio con una conferencia. Quiero dar una pequeña semblanza de Michael Kaufman, que reside en Toronto, Canadá. Su semblanza es la siguiente. Durante 4 décadas, él ha sido asesor, activista y escritor en torno al involucramiento de los hombres en la defensa de los derechos de las mujeres, así como la transformación positiva de las propias vidas de los hombres. Él es cofundador de la coalición del Listón Blanco, donde los hombres nos comprometemos a poner fin a la violencia contra las mujeres. Ha trabajado en 50 países en conjunto con las Naciones Unidas, gobiernos, universidades, organizaciones de la sociedad civil, así como organizaciones de mujeres. La Asociación Internacional de Funcionarios Públicos, llamada Apolitical, lo nombró como una de las 100 personas más influyentes de la política mundial hacia la igualdad de género. Recientemente ha formado parte de los consejos asesores del Grupo 7 para el primer ministro canadiense Justin Trudeau y del presidente francés Emmanuel Macron. Recientemente ha publicado su libro, y el título podría ser el mismo título para este evento: El tiempo ha llegado, ¿por qué los hombres deben unirse a la revolución de la igualdad de género? Y además es novelista. Su última novela se llama La última salida. Quiero agregar que Michael Kaufman es de las personas que conozco que mejor ha podido combinar el desarrollo del conocimiento en el campo de las masculinidades junto con el avance en iniciativas y la creación de iniciativas para transformar estas masculinidades. Bienvenido, Michael. Bienvenue. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Benno. Benno, of course, is one of the world's leaders in engaging men and boys, transforming the lives of men and boys, and working in solidarity with feminist organizations and women in general. I'm so honored to be with you. I will be speaking in English today, but let me first start by saying estoy alegre de estar aquí con ustedes, pero es lástima, pero no es posible para mí de dar una presentación inteligente en español. Pero es necesario para mí de hablar en inglés. It's life. Let me start with a horrible number. The number is 10. Every single day in Mexico, 10 women are murdered. 10 women are murdered by a man, in many cases, a man who is in a relationship with her. the number 10. This talk is dedicated to the women who have lost and continue to lose their lives at the hands of men. I say this with great sadness, and I also say it with great rage and anger. When we talk about violence against women, yes, we're talking about femicide, the murder of women, but we're also talking about so much more. We're talking about sexual assault. We're talking about sexual harassment at work, at school, on the streets. We're talking about emotional and physical abuse at home. And let me be very clear when I talk about emotional abuse at home. I'm not referring to people having arguments. I'm not referring to someone just not being nice or bickering. I'm talking about domestic terrorism, the terrorism that is used to belittle, to control, to terrify, to scare far too many women. We're also talking about the trafficking of women and girls into prostitution. We're talking about a worldwide pandemic, long before COVID. Long before COVID, we've had this pandemic of men's violence against women. And right now, in the midst of this COVID epidemic, more women are directly affected by the pandemic of violence against women than COVID by far. We know from good research around the world that approximately half of women, it varies by country to country, but half of women have experienced some form of violence at the hands of a man. What that means, if it's half of all women, it means that a quarter of the world's population either is living with or living in fear of these forms of violence. But let me say this, in spite of starting with this horror show, these examples, this is an optimistic talk. This is an optimistic moment. We're not here primarily because of this terrible problem. That's not why we're here. We are here because we are part of ending a terrible problem. And that makes this an optimistic moment. Now, why can I feel confident? Is there something, they put in the water in Canada that makes me, deliriously confident? I am confident this is a moment of change. First and foremost, because women all over the globe have said no. Heroic women standing up to abuse within their relationships, in their communities, in their workplaces, in their universities and schools have said no. Heroic women have demonstrated and lobbied and pushed for governments to change the laws and for police to change their practices. Women have pushed to provide shelter and refuge for women in need. To those women in Mexico, and not just those women who have been active on the streets, but women in their homes who have resisted, to those women, we all owe our thanks. I'm also confident of change because there's more governments in the world that are taking action. Sadly, there are some that are not yet, or that are resisting change, or defining women and feminism as the enemy. Yes, we still have those governments, you know it well, but more governments are beginning to take action. I'm confident in this moment because violence against women and girls is not inevitable. I'll return to that in a moment. And I'm confident because more and more men are speaking out against the violence. Men's silence is beginning to end. I want to be clear about a few things right at the beginning. I will be talking about men's violence against women. I will be saying some things about how we raise boys to be men, the behavior of too many men. But I want to be very clear. The majority of men in Mexico, the majority of men in Canada, the majority of men in almost every country in the world will never use an act of violence against women, will never commit an act of violence against a woman. The majority of men don't use violence. Now, unfortunately, though, the majority of men have been silent, in many cases complicit. But I want to be clear, this is not a blanket accusation against all men. This is not a talk to induce collective guilt or collective blame. I also want to be very clear that this talk, our work together, the work of feminism, is not anti-male. In fact, it's quite the opposite, because feminism believes in a world of possibility, a world without violence against women, a world of equality. You can't get any more pro-male than that, because there is a great and deep belief in the possibility of my half of the species to be loving, caring, and nurturing. This talk is about bringing the silence to an end. So I want to look first at why violence against women exists. Now, if it was inevitable, if it was just, in our genes, in our biology, that we must, violence is always going to happen, then I'd say, let's not waste time with this discussion. It's just the way things are. Now, there's some truth to that. Humans have the biological capacity to be violent against our own species. That's an unfortunate truth. But several years ago, two very clever researchers, an anthropologist and a sociologist, decided to go through the anthropological records, that is, the studies of different societies over the past 150 years. Many of these were tribal societies that give us a window into the human past. And they asked one question. They said, in all these different diverse societies that have existed, that we still have records of, was there violence in all these societies? Was there violence against women? Was there violence among men? Was there violence against children? If it had been in all or virtually all the societies, then they would say, it's unfortunate, but we're stuck with this. But what they found out was, just from those records, they discovered that in approximately half the societies that had been investigated, there was little or no violence. Little or no violence against women, among men, or against children. In other words, it's a human possibility, but it's not inevitable. So then they asked the second question. What distinguished the societies with the violence from those with little or no violence? And what they discovered was this. The societies with little or no violence were societies based on a high degree of equality between women and men. There were societies where men and women shared childcare equally or near equally. But the societies with these different forms of violence, in each and every case, were what we call patriarchal societies, societies of men's power, of men's domination, of men's control. Now, the key thing here is not that these societies had men, because both had equal numbers of men and women, but the key is the word power. The key is the word inequality. Because once you have the power of one group over another, unfortunately, violence becomes a means to maintain that power and control. Let me show you a few pictures to discuss this. I'm going to just go into screen sharing mode. Give me a second. There, I hope that's working. Well, much of what I'm about to say is based on the work I've done over the years. My most recent book, for example, various articles that are on my website, including one called The 7 Ps of Men's Violence. Those are available to you if you would like. Now, let me say this. We in our generations have made great progress towards gender equality. Men's power is not as ubiquitous and strong as it was 30, 40 years ago. But in spite of real progress that we've made, led by women, we still live in male-dominated societies. What does that look like today? Well, for one thing, we still live in countries where men are making more than women, depending on the country, where women are making 70, 80 cents for every dollar that men make. We still live in a world in which we have what we call job ghettos, where we have proportionately higher numbers of women workers. And where we have that, we have lower pay. We still live in a society where most of our political leaders and our religious leaders are men. Some we like, some we don't like. But what is common is that almost all of them are still men. We still live in a society where we train groups of men to be soldiers, to fight, to kill. We still live in a world in which men control the economies of the world. And let me just say, what a great job my half of the species has done on the economic front over the past 10, 15 years. We still live in a world in which our most celebrated athletes are men, the ones that we pay the most, that we cheer on the most. We still live in a society where women do a disproportionate amount of the housework. Yes, more and more men are doing more of their share of housework and childcare, but it's still very, very unequal, even when women are equally working outside the home. And we still live in a world in which women's bodies are used to sell products. And not just images of women's bodies, but of men's power over women, such as this fashion ad that is essentially a rape scene. That is still the world we live in. Now, where does this get us? Well, we still live in a male-dominated society. The link to violence is this. Some men use violence to maintain their power in relationships and in society as a whole. Violence that they use is not because they're crazy or different, but they're using it as a tool. Just like if you're going to build something, you're going to use a hammer as a tool. They're using violence as a tool to maintain their power in that relationship. And that relationship may be a love relationship, a domestic relationship. It may be a work relationship. It may be a relationship between a professor and a student, but he is using violence. And I want to say that the continuation of violence against women is at the heart of the continuation of patriarchy. The continued threat against women, the continued put down of women is at the very heart of patriarchy. That's the first point I want to make. The men's violence is about inequality and power. The second point is this. It has to do with what we call privilege and entitlement. Well, what do I mean by this? What do I mean by privilege? And do men actually have privilege? Let me tell you a story when I first learned about privilege. This was many, many years ago. I live in Toronto, Canada, and it was a beautiful autumn day. The trees were orange and red and yellow. The sky was blue. And I took a walk for hours through a park, just feeling good to be alive. The next day I ran into a woman friend, and I was still going on poetically about this day in the park. And this woman friend looked at me and she said, "That's interesting because here's what happened to me." And she started telling me about how as she walked through a different park, some man started following behind her. Didn't get close, but really freaked her out. And then she passed two men sitting on a park bench. The men were talking, but when she passed, they stopped talking and they looked her up and down and they made some sounds. Something else happened. In other words, for me, it was a beautiful day. I got to walk in the park. For my friend here in Toronto, in a very safe city, she was harassed. She experienced a form of violence by these different men who felt entitled to harass her. It's a story about their entitlement, but it's also a story about the privilege that I enjoyed as a man to walk freely in a park in my city. Now, let me tell you this. My first reaction to her was to apologize. I said, "Vard, I'm so sorry this happened to you." She interrupted me. She said, "Michael, why are you apologizing? Why are you apologizing? Did you harass someone yesterday? Did you harass me yesterday?" I said, "No, but I apologize on behalf of mankind." And she said, "Michael, I don't want you to feel guilty for something you didn't do. I want you to feel angry. I want you to feel angry that women do not have the same basic privileges that you have. But those privileges have been invisible to you because you have them. And that's what privilege is about. If we are in a group that because of our sex, because of the color of our skin, because of our sexual orientation, our physical abilities, our economic class. If we're in a group that has more social or economic or political power than other groups, that means by definition, we're going to enjoy some forms of privilege that these people do not. But by the fact that we enjoy them, it's just life to us. We don't even know that we enjoy those things. What is the link between the existence of privilege and entitlement to sexual assault in particular? Well, I think it's pretty simple. Some men feel entitled to have sex with who they want, when they want, in the way they want. Some men feel entitled to have their wife cooking for them, cleaning for them, looking after the kids, having sex with them when they want. He feels entitled to that. And when they don't get what they want, some men feel entitled to use force to get it. The link is very clear. The link is also clear because as someone who enjoys forms of privilege, just, I happen to be a man, I happen to be white, I happen to be straight. I'm not guilty about those things. That's just how I was, who I am. But because of its invisibility, if I don't look around, if I don't ask women about their experiences, if I don't ask LGBTQ people about their experiences, if I don't ask people of color about their experiences, I will never know about all these things. I'll never know about violence against women or Black men and so forth. The third thing I want to share with you in terms of the causes of men's violence, one was power, one was privilege and entitlement, and this third is what we can think of as permission. The violence exists because we in our society have given permission. We have said that violence against women is a personal matter. It's a domestic matter. It's between two people. This is the only crime that we consider a personal matter. Imagine if you were in your apartment, you look out the window, you see a store being robbed. What would you do? You would call the police. But right across Mexico today, tonight, right across Toronto today, tonight, people hear women being beaten up. People at work or school see a woman being teased or harassed. Do they say anything? Do they speak out? They say, oh, I better not get involved. It's just a personal matter. That would be like looking out your window, seeing a store being robbed and saying, should I call the police? No, it's a personal matter between the robber and the store owner. Mm-hmm. We would never say that. But when it comes to gender-based violence, that's what we say. We give permission by saying it's a personal matter. We give permission by not having good enough laws. We give permission by having laws, but not having the police and judges implement those laws. We give permission by having religious leaders make excuses and on and on. We do all these things. These 3 points I've just made are at the very heart of a feminist analysis of men's violence, men's power, privilege and entitlement, and permission. But there's more. There's more that I would like to share with you today in terms of the causes of men's violence. Now, think of it. We have this male-dominated society. We raise boys to fit into that, to live up to that, to be real men, all that stuff. You would think that men would have an easy time fitting in. You would think that men are very comfortable with our power, with our being men. But let me tell you a story that made me realize the problems. This is a story from many, many years ago when my son was born. It's one of the stories I start my book about. It's a story that Benno has heard me tell before. It's the story of when my son was born. He's now in his 40s, almost 40. So there we were in the delivery room. My kid had just been born and he'd been alive for 5 seconds. And I didn't yet know if it was a boy or a girl. Now, it's not because I don't know the difference. It's because there were so many tears in my eyes. I couldn't see if it was a boy or a girl. I couldn't see the little thing on the little thing until the nurse spoke. And the nurse said this. And she said it this way. Until this point, the nurse had been speaking in her normal voice. And suddenly, her voice dropped down very deep. And she said, "It's a boy. What a strong little fellow." I was totally shocked. not because it was a boy. I knew there's a 50-50 chance of that. But I was shocked by the change in her voice and what she said, and I knew if it had been a girl, her voice would have gone up higher, and the nurse would have said something about how beautiful my daughter was. My son was indeed very strong, but he was also the most beautiful thing that ever squirmed its way onto the planet. But that's what happens from the moment of birth. You and I are systematically treated differently. And here's what happens to boys. Let me share a screen again with you. Here's what happens to boys. We raise boys with a set of expectations. You will be strong. You will be, able to operate machinery. You will be super. You will be fearless. No, you will not have any fear. You will learn how to fight. You will not show many emotions. You won't show, don't show any feelings, even when you're dying of lung cancer from smoking Marlboros. You will be a superhero. Now, the problem with all of this, yes, there's times where we want men and women, all of our children, to be strong, to be tough, to be fearless. Those things are all, part of the human repertoire. Those can be good things. There are times when we want people just to hold their emotions down. Of course. The problem for boys and for men is that we're told we always must be tough. We always must be fearless. We always must be in control. We can take the pain. None of us can live up to that. No man can live up to those expectations. And when we don't, what we do is we humiliate other men. We say to boys, act like a man. Big boys don't cry. Don't be a sissy. Don't be a girl. We humiliate and abuse boys into manhood. Well, men can't live up to this. We can't always be strong. Like any other human, we need help at times. We have feelings. But because of all this, because of these unreal expectations, men are torn apart. And I don't just mean this figuratively. Men die younger than women. Men die younger because we engage more often in risk-taking behavior to prove that we are real men. Men die younger because we're less likely to get help from a doctor or a psychiatrist because it's seen as a sign of weakness. Men are more likely to end up in prison. Men are more likely to abuse alcohol and other drugs. Men are more likely to be distant from our own feelings and emotions. Now, I'm presenting something very strange to you. I started off by talking about men's power, about men's control, but I'm now presenting to you a concept that has been central to my own academic work and activist work over the past 30, 40 years. And that is a concept that I call the paradox of men's power, or alternately, men's contradictory experiences of power. What I mean is this. Yes, there are many forms of vulnerability that men experience, but the reason we experience those things is precisely because of the way that we have constructed a world of men's power. So what is the link between that and the use of violence by too many men? Well, sadly, I think the link is pretty clear. Far too many men use violence not only to have power over women or power over other men, but to use violence to compensate for their own feelings of weakness, of insecurity, of not being a real man. A couple of years ago, I was actually in the room with Donald Trump. I was attending the G7 summit as part of a very small group of women and one man who were speaking to world leaders about gender equality. And one of the things I noticed about Donald Trump was how insecure he seemed. It was quite shocking, and it was visceral, and you felt it. Even someone with the most powerful job, the most powerful guy on the planet, can still carry those feelings of insecurity. I want to say this did not make me feel sorry for him, but I certainly empathized with him without sympathizing for 1 second. And he certainly is a man who has used violence against women, against the world, against Black people, against people of Mexico and many others to prove his manhood. I want to just point out one other thing. In that concept, men's contradictory experiences of power, note the plural, experiences. We cannot just talk about men in general. In our studies on men and masculinity, we recognize the very different experiences and relations of power to power of different men. There's a big difference between the man who is a farmer in Chiapas and, say, the governor of Guerrero, for example. You cannot say that all men are just in there equally. So let's take this analysis now. Just as I started by using the number 10, the horrible number 10, and I said this talk is dedicated to the 10 women who are murdered every day in Mexico and the many thousands around the world. But I want to share with you 10 things I think we need to do to end men's violence against women once and for all. First of all, if the root of it is patriarchy and inequality, the first and the ultimate, not the first, but the ultimate thing we need to do is we need gender equality. We need to end patriarchy. We need to end men's entitlement. We need to end the social permission. We need societies of complete gender equality, complete respect for diversity, and not just gender equality between women and men, but gender equality in the sense of respect for all the ways that individuals may choose to express their own identity, to the complete plurality of gendered experiences and gendered self-definitions. We need to not just have that equality, but to celebrate that. Now, that's obviously a long-term process. Anything we do is a step in that direction, of course. All of our struggles are steps in that direction, but that's a long-term struggle. So what are some of the specific things we need? So the second thing we need, second point, is we need policies and actions. First of all, to support women's organizations. We need verbal support. We need monetary and financial support for independent women's organizations to not just exist, but to flourish and to thrive. When I saw, I'm not here to talk about Mexico. I'll talk about Canada, my own country, but I just have to say, when I saw on International Women's Day, barricades put up in front of your national palace to keep women away. Well, it's hard for me to even express what I felt. I felt anger. I felt sadness. I felt as someone who deeply loves Mexico. I felt shame. As a man, I felt those things. We need policies and action to actively support women's organizations, women's independent organizations. They need our collective and strong support. Third thing we need legal reform. There is no country in the world that has the full panoply of laws that adequately address all the different aspects of violence against women. There are different countries who've done more. There's different countries that are leaders in this. The Scandinavian countries have done some incredible things, but other countries too have passed some amazing laws. We need to learn from each other, and we need the legal reform, and ongoing legal reform, because we keep learning. Researchers, feminist researchers and others keep learning more, and that means that we need laws that respond to what we learn about the problem. Fourth thing, you can't just have laws. You need the training and the action by police and judges. And you need consequences if police and judges don't enact the law in proper ways. We need training of healthcare professionals and policies affecting them. We need training and training and programs for religious leaders, for social workers, for teachers, because just changing laws will not be enough. Fifth thing, we need action right in our workplaces and our schools. We need strong measures to end sexual harassment. If we had time, I'd love to spend another hour just talking about some approaches that I've taken working with organizations to develop policies that actually get at the subtleties and nuances as well as the more blatant forms of sexual harassment, whether it's in person or electronically. We need support in our workplaces and schools for women experiencing violence. We need initiatives in our schools to end sexist biases in the teaching materials, in what teams we support, in who leads, and so forth. That's number 5. Number 6, we need equal pay. We need equal pay in our societies so that women can afford to leave abusive relationships. Number 7, we need to transform the ways that we raise boys to be men. We've got to get rid of these unreal expectations. You will be strong. You will be powerful. You will be in control. You won't show feelings. You'll never back down. You won't show fear. On and on. Those things are not only a death trap to women, but those things are a death trap to men as well. We've got to transform the ways we raise boys to be men, not only through these, general messages, but through the rules that we have for our sons and daughters. They should have the same rules at home and going out. They should have the same support for their education. They should have the same jobs at home, to share all the jobs at home, and on and on. Now, to make that possible leads to number 8. We need to transform the role of fathers. One of the things I argue in my book, The Time Has Come, is perhaps the number one thing that will have an impact, the number one thing with men that will have an impact on the gender equality revolution, is when men become full and equal parents, where men define our lives equally, not only by our jobs outside of the home, but our jobs in the home. That we share all household tasks equally. There's only it's 2 jobs men can't do as parents. We don't get pregnant very easily. In fact, not at all. And secondly, and these are males, I should say, because there are trans men who can get pregnant. But males, we don't get pregnant, and we're not very good at breastfeeding. Besides that, every other job of parenting, we are equally capable of doing once we learn how to do it. And once we do, here's the main job that you need as a parent. It's not how to cook. It's not how to change a diaper. It's not how to clean. The main skill you need as a parent is empathy, to feel what others are feeling, to feel what those kids are feeling, because they can't talk. They can't express themselves. And so as men develop more empathy, men become less able to commit violence. Violence not just against children, but violence against other adults, because we can feel the pain we're causing. That's a whole other talk if we had time, but that's the 8th thing, to transform the role of fathers. Number 9, we need public campaigns. We need public campaigns to engage men. Public campaigns to engage men as fathers, as co-workers, as individuals working to end violence against women. And as I said before, Benno de Keijzer, who introduced me as one of the global leaders in this work, including in a network called Men Engage, but also beyond that. But let me say this, and many of my other compañeros in Mexico too have been leaders internationally in this work. But we need specific campaigns to engage men to end violence against women. Now, what does this look like? What do these campaigns look like? Well, I'm going to just go into my sharing screen again to show you some things. I think we're there now. I've been part of one campaign for the past 30 years or so called the White Ribbon Campaign, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. But it's a campaign that is based on the understanding that men must join women in speaking out against violence against women in all of its forms. Whether it's a White Ribbon Campaign or wonderful campaigns like in Mexico, such as the effort that started last year of men lighting a candle, speaking out against violence against women. It doesn't matter what the name of the campaign is, but there's certain basic principles. First of all, we need positive messages. It's not enough to say, don't do this, don't do that. this can't be based on collective guilt or collective blame. It can't be based on messages that are to make men feel bad about being men. It must be based on messages that make men feel good about being change makers, about being lovers, about being nurturers and caregivers. We need campaigns with positive messages. We need campaigns that go mainstream. And White Ribbon, as I'll tell you in a minute, is an example of that are totally mainstream. We want to work right across the social and political spectrum. What that means is we've got to work with people we don't agree with on many things. In a campaign, I think, to end violence against women, we've got to say it's not good enough just for people who agree on who they vote for, or on politics, or if they are feminist or not, to work together. We have to set up broad coalitions, a big umbrella over us to work together. So collectively as men, we are saying, you and I disagree on this point. We vote differently. We have different politics, this and that and the next thing. But let's agree on one point, that there is no excuse for any form of violence against women, and we are going to speak out now against it. We need to find male champions across society to speak out. We need diverse approaches. One size does not fit all. Let me tell you very quickly about the campaign that I have been involved in and co-founded a number of years ago, called the White Ribbon Campaign. 3 of us started it back in 1991, WRC, White Ribbon Campaign. And well, by now it's spread, we've lost track actually, to maybe 90 countries, 95 countries. Some of these campaigns have come and gone. Mexico at one point, maybe should be on the list. There were some colleagues, I think I took it off worried about it, but there actually was an official White Ribbon Campaign. Sorry, I took it off earlier thinking, anyway, excuse me for that. Latin America, Mexico. So we've had campaigns around the world, including Lazo Blanco. And let me just give you a sense of what it looks like in different countries. Here's it's a campaign that often celebrates the capacity of men to speak out and just to find creative ways to do so, like this scene at Carnival in Brazil, or these men in Namibia in Southern Africa who were rallying outside of their parliament. These men and women in Lebanon and Beirut who, again, made a public display to get people to stop and talk to them about violence against women. Here's an interesting one from Pakistan, a white ribbon wrestling tournament. Again, they just were finding a way to get men together to talk and hear speakers about the problem of violence against women. You can see, some of the paradoxes of this. Yeah, these guys were getting together to wrestle, to fight each other. But yet the idea is to find mainstream ways to reach out to a broad part of the population. Here's from part of China, Wuhan, which we all know about now. From a number of years ago, men signing a public pledge not to commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women. Here's a rally in Siberia, Russia. Here's a lovely picture from Cambodia, this little boy who said he wanted to help when he saw people giving out a white ribbon. And here he is, this boy giving a white ribbon, this symbol of men speaking out against violence against women, to a street vendor, and then explaining to this man why he should speak out. Here is a group of students from Mongolia, a police officer in Guatemala. Here is in Scotland, just a poster showing diverse men. From Chile, the idea of women and men in the same boat, together working to end violence against women. Another campaign from Latin America. New Zealand, a cross-section of workers saying proud to show we don't tolerate violence against women. A street display in South Africa. And I'm so proud that one of the white ribbon marches years ago was led by Nelson Mandela. Reaching out to diverse religious communities. Here's one from Canada, a group started called Muslims for a White Ribbon. Here's at a workplace, a big a big, huge company mining company that put white ribbons on some of their vehicles in Australia. The Australian Armed Forces, you can see the contradictions. Here's this army, but they're saying, we want to speak out against violence against women. So I just want to share some of those images with you of the white ribbon. Not saying it is the answer but just the way we can organize. Now, let me conclude, and then hopefully we'll have time for a few questions. I said I was going to share 10 things because of 10 women who are murdered a day in Mexico. I've only shared 9 so far. So what's the 10th thing? Well, the 10th thing is this. We need you. We need all of you. And particularly, I'm going to address the men here who are listening. We need the men who are listening, and we need your brothers and your sons and your male friends and your fathers and your uncles and your grandfathers and your grandsons and your neighbors. We need you to become active in the struggle to end men's violence against women. I want to be very clear, even though I say we need you. Women will continue to challenge men. Women will continue to lead the work to end men's violence against women. Absolutely. Men have nothing to be afraid of. In fact, we should celebrate the strength and the resilience and the power of our sisters and our mothers, our daughters, our friends. But at the same time as women lead those, we need men active as allies. We need men speaking out, challenging ourselves, challenging our brothers, those around us. As I said before, this is not an act of collective guilt. This is not an act of collective penance. This is not an act to show that I'm better than other men. It's none of those things. It's an act of love. It's an act of solidarity. It's a way of saying men can be part, men must be part of the greatest revolution in human history, the gender equality revolution. The origins of male-dominated societies go back only 8,000 or 10,000 years. Humans just like us, except for they didn't have Zoom and Facebook, but just like us, have been living, for 250,000 years, and only for 8,000 or 10,000 years of that have we had male-dominated societies. And right now, feminism represents a revolution, a change, an overthrow of the male-dominated patriarchal societies that not only have crushed too many women, not only have led to the deaths of too many women, but paradoxically have also crushed men crushing other men, far too many men and boys. Men must be part of the feminist revolution. But at the same time, we must reach out to all of our brothers and not insist that they call themselves feminists, but to insist that all of our brothers speak out against men's violence today, that all of our brothers look hard at our own behavior and attitudes and actions and weed out, get rid of actions that constitute violence against women, whether it's physical, sexual, verbal, financial, all those different things. Men must be part of the gender equality revolution. And this revolution will be a moment that our children will read about, our great-great-grandchildren will someday read about. We can all be part of that. Ending violence against women is absolutely critical for women and girls. Ending violence against women, though, is also absolutely critical for men and boys. It's absolutely critical for those who don't define themselves within that gender binary. And it's especially important for our children and our grandchildren. Violence against women has been with us too long. Violence against women can and must and will end now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much from my heart and our heart. I know I speak for so many people who are listening. I'm going to share, I don't speak in English or in Spanish.
No, en español.
En español, ok. Michael, quiero decirte que
I want to tell you
aquí presentes están
that
más
here
personas
we have
en el Zoom, en Facebook,
in Zoom, people in Zoom, in Facebook,
y eso emociona muchísimo.
and this is very exciting. In this, I would like to mention two women in the last week. Montserrat, killed by her boyfriend, student in a university in Veracruz, and a tremendous case of a professor who was teaching English in Zoom, and her partner came and violated her. And she was begging for him to stop, for him to let her turn off the mic in Zoom, so their students couldn't listen. Michael, you have gave us a wide perspective of this complex combination between the analysis of persistent violence, permanent towards women. Maybe we need to mention communication media, as they are a big transmitter of this permission and practice. When a man likes action movies, he's saying that he likes movies with violence. You have also showed the balance, the possibility of change that is being performed already, and it's missing the incorporation and engagement of men. A big part of universities that are growing in their engagement towards gender violence, women violence, against violence. There's a huge work creating knowledge of masculinities, creating awareness of what is happening with masculinities, all the work performed by civic society. And this meeting is supported by the efforts of different organizations like Cómplices por la Igualdad, Hombres Diversos, Hombres, that has been working with men accused of being violent, and the Mexican Society of Gender Studies. This meeting is important in between activism and the spaces where knowledge is generated. I'm going to read questions. We have 40 minutes for this. I'm going to read different so you can take note. How to prevent polarization that is being created in our society? I mean, I agree that education is the key to transform society, but this is a long term. But now we have a situation of violence where it seems to be women against men. What immediate actions can we take to prevent this to exacerbate? This might be related with protests and demonstrations that women have made. What happens when you learn by following the example? When kids see the example or see how the mother is in charge of domestic work and the father is the one who has the opportunities of studying work.
Between a man, let me change to English. How is the experience of power similar or different between men from first world countries in contrast with men in Latin America or from marginalized communities? How is the experience from a white man in contrast to a brown man? Do we need a decolonized perspective here? Vuelvo al español. Alejandro Martínez pregunta, después de hacer su análisis,
after your analysis, Dr. Kaufman, can you give us some strategies to work with the students in universities? Can you give us a strategy to work with the student community? Hernando Hernandez from the University from Querétaro. Listening to you is very refreshing. You call us to be engaged in different levels, personal, self-care, as father, as a partner, with my students, with other men that I share. It's very refreshing, your speech, very enthusiastic and optimistic. I know there is more to do, but your lovely and careful call, it's not necessarily unrevolutionary. What campaign has had positive results promoting the participation of men in the world? What could you say to a man that want to transform and want to be part of the transformation towards equity, but live in a hostile environment in relation with a violent environment? How to keep the transformational energy? It is necessary to add this perspective in the different processes that we are taking, that we are performing. How did you make men to come and manifest against women violence? How does Afro communities in Latin America have perceived the wideness of the ribbon? Finally, I know there are many questions. Thank you for your questions, and maybe we can take a couple of more questions.
Okay, is it back to me?
Yes.
Good. So we have until 10 o'clock tonight to answer these questions. Well, let me do my best to answer as much as I can. I'll go through these the best I can. The first question was about what immediate action. Yes, immediate action is not we end patriarchy. That is not immediate action. Immediate action is not we end all violence against women. That's not immediate action. That's our goal. So what we need, I think, is to find ways to engage the communities where we work and where we live. It could be our academic community. It could be our religious community. It could be our neighborhood. It could be our extended family. But for me, what is key is not for me to show how much better I am from other men. It's not to perform, I'm the hero now because I speak out. For me, what is key is to find language and actions that connect to the men and boys around me. This isn't to show off. This is not to prove that I'm different. This is not to get women saying, good, Michael, you're a good man. This is to make connections to my brothers. And that can be very difficult. It means finding a common language. It's finding the things that, a man, if I give a talk and I might have a man stand up and disagree with me on 10 things, I'm going to find the one thing that we agree on and use that as a wedge to begin a conversation. My interest, and I think our interest should be as men, connecting with other men to bring them into a conversation. It's not to show, look how great I am, look how feminist I am. I think it's to make connections with our brothers, to support them through change, to not feel superior, to not feel better, to know that we ourselves as men, have all sorts of ways that we live with our own privilege, that we benefit from sexism, of course, but to find ways to connect with our brothers in all of our social and political diversity and religious diversity, and to find ways to work over and in spite of those differences to make connections. In other words, we can't assume that, millions and millions of Mexican men are going to automatically agree with the, several hundred or a couple thousand who may be part of this conversation today. We have to turn that around. And we have to say, how can the 2,000 or whatever people or 1,000 men, whatever it might be today in this conversation, connect up with the millions? It can't be, we can't say it's their responsibility to come to us. We have to turn that around and say it's our responsibility to connect with them. So we have to find the language of connection, not the language of showing off how feminist I am or how different I am or how much better I am. No, we have to find the language of connection with our brothers. And that's hard to do. Second question, and that's also, I should say, is very culturally and nationally specific. How that might happen in the District Federal is going to be different than the language that and the images and the discussion in Chiapas, for example. It's going to be different between a university and a plant that is producing car parts or a farmer's field. So we have to be good listeners if we're going to make connections with our brothers. Second thing, it had to do, if I can read my notes here, the experience, yes, how are the experiences of power similar or different between Canada, where I live, and Latin America, white men versus men of color, and so forth. The experiences are both very different and in some ways the same. Where they are different, of course, is in terms of our access to power, our access to wealth, who defines issues on the world stage, who has resources, who has money, who has a voice. My first language is English. This gives me access because of Anglo hegemony to the world. Someone who speaks an indigenous language in Mexico doesn't have that same access to the world. So there are absolutely power differences among different groups of men based on education, based on region, based on language, based on class, based on the color of our skin. But there are also common elements. And that is that whatever our relationship to other men, because patriarchy is not only a system of men's power over women, it's also a system of the power of some men over other men. So on a grand scale, we're challenging various forms of domination and power, whether it's sexism or racism or homophobia, and so forth. This is why campaigns like White Ribbon developed explicitly as a decentralized campaign. We felt very strongly that I, in Canada, not only should not, but cannot tell someone in Mexico how you should run a campaign, how you should speak to other Mexican men. For the simple reason, I don't know. This is what you know. So I believe in decentralized approaches. But we certainly have common experiences, because within our different cultures, what is common is that within almost every culture in the world, with only a few exceptions, men within those cultures have disproportionate power as men and over women. And that is a commonality. Third question, strategies to, oh man, what does that say? Strategies to work at universities? Is that really? Okay. Boy, I've got one strategy should be to learn how to write clearly so I can see my notes. I think that our strategies in universities, in a way, are the same as our strategies everywhere else. And that is, we have to start with listening. If we're men doing this work, we have to start by listening to the voices of our sisters, to hear about the issues, to hear the concerns, to not take over. But at the same time, we have to listen to our brothers, because our goal is not for me to prove, look how much better I am than other men. It's not to say, well, I'm different from other men. My job as a pro-feminist man is to connect with other men, in spite of our differences, in spite of how we might see the world different, in spite of him saying, I'm not a feminist. I want to find ways to connect with that man. So that has to start with listening. That's where it starts, listening to what is said and what is not said, both by women, but also by our brothers. And then within that, I really believe in decentralized approaches. I believe that the strategies that you can use at UNAM are going to be different than the strategies that if one of you goes off and organizes campesinos, is going to be different than if you go and work in the, try to reach out to the maquiladores. It's going to be different depending on different groups of men. And so that's why we have to start by listening and understanding their realities, and then working with them to develop strategies to actually bring men in. And it's not just those men coming to us. We've got to go to them. We've got to find the words and the actions that connect with other men, because those other men are in the majority, and we can't expect them all to come to us. We've got to find ways to come to them. That's the key, I think. The next question, I can't read it. Not revolution? Is that what it says? What was the next question, Benno? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Maybe go to the next. I will look it up, because there's many questions pouring in.
So the strategies at university, and then
there was a question on polarization between men and women in our society.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think we have to be a bit careful with that. Women, men have dominated social discourse. We've dominated religion. We've dominated governments. We've dominated business. In many cases, we've dominated families for the past 8,000 or 10,000 years. So when I hear men say, oh, women are trying to take over, I go, give me a break. It's the goal is equality, but getting there means that men have got to learn to step back a bit. Men have got to learn to listen for a while. Men have got to learn to take the criticism. It doesn't mean that the voice of every woman is 100% true. There are huge differences of opinion and ideas among different women. Of course there are. There's going to be different truths and different realities. But I think for men, we've got to start with listening to the voices of women and their concerns. Not to say it's all 100% true, but let's start with that listening. I think is absolutely key. And then working as men with humility and respect. Saying, yes, we have something to contribute to this work. And in particular, what we have to contribute, I think, is to reach out to our brothers. But that's within a context of respecting the voices, the leadership, the wisdom of women that has been suppressed far too long. And that's a difficult thing. It's a very difficult thing. But I think that's key to the collective work we're doing. When we talk about, I think the next one, Benno, if you're following along with me, was a question about campaigns to engage men. Is that right? Talking about what type of campaigns, or is it what I was just saying?
The contradiction of using the white ribbon with Black communities.
Oh, I see.
Their reaction to that. As white meaning peace and white meaning goodness and no violence.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that, we developed that symbol. It was many years ago. Now there's all sorts of ribbon campaigns, but this was one of the two first ones, along with the AIDS ribbon. White is a color that's used in many different cultures in different ways. It's used in Asia as a color representing death. It's used in many Western cultures as a color associated with peace. It's used in some other countries and cultures as representing the combination of all cultures, because when you blend all the different colors, you get white. So it's not. It's certainly not. White ribbon is not associated with the supposed white skin color. And if you look at me, you wouldn't describe my skin color as white. It's sort of a pinky, orangey red. So it's not to denote a skin color, even though obviously shorthand will say I'm white. But I think the point I'm making is not to get caught up on the symbol. Yes, a white ribbon in different forms is used in many countries, but my interest is not, selling a product, but is the type of activities we engage in. And so whether it's seemed as appropriate or not to use a white ribbon as a symbol, as it's used in many different countries, for me, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is for men to become active, to speak out, to raise our voices in solidarity and support of women. The next question, I think, was about, what would I say to a man who works in a very hostile environment? I mean, a lot of us do. A lot of our workplaces, some of our families, some of our communities, some of our political parties, some of our religious establishments, unfortunately, that list can go on and on, are very hostile to messages of feminism, of equality, of messages of ending violence against women. For me, there's different parts to the answer. First of all, we have to find allies. I may be in a workplace where everyone around me is hostile to what I've been saying, but I'm going to find allies outside my work. I'm going to find men and women who I can talk to on the phone, who I can get together, who will give me a hug when I've had a bad day trying to talk to others, who I can cry with, who I can cheer a victory with. So one of the things that's key is to find allies. But to build real allies means to build inclusive networks. There is no point, or very little point, to develop a network only with people that agree with you on everything, because you're going to end up with a very small number of people. So I really believe in developing sort of larger, welcoming networks. For me to be able to say, you and I can work together. We disagree on this point. We disagree on the environment. We disagree on who we vote for politically. We disagree on climate change. But do we agree that women should not be beaten up by their husband? Yeah. Do we agree that no man should feel he has the right to have sex with any woman he wants? Yeah, we agree on that. Do we agree that women should not be sexually harassed at work? We agree with that on that. So then I say to that man, let's agree to disagree on who we vote for. Let's agree to disagree on climate change. Let's agree to disagree on many different issues, but let's agree to work to end these immediate forms of violence against women. Now, you could argue more globally that the whole system is imbued with violence against women. But as soon as you start doing that, you're going to find you're going to, be in a room with 10 people you agree with. So for me, it's finding ways to agree to disagree on critical points, on important points, on things that connect together, but find ways to work together, even with people we disagree with. I remember having a discussion years ago with some colleagues in Italy, and I was arguing that we should get the Pope to wear a white ribbon. And they said that would be silly because you wouldn't see it because he's wearing this white costume. And they said correctly that he's head of this whole institution that excludes women, that has denigrated women, and on and on. And I said, you're absolutely right. But wouldn't it be good if the Pope clearly spoke out against violence against women? In other words, let's find ways we can work together in spite of differences. And at the same time, I can still criticize the Pope for being this and for being that. I'm not saying I agree with the Pope on anything or everything, but to find ways to work together. And it's pretty interesting. A number of years ago in Pakistan, the White Ribbon Campaign actually brought together a group of religious leaders to talk about these issues. And these Muslim, these group of imams, Muslim religious leaders, who certainly were not in favor of gender equality by any means, but at the end of a series of discussions, they issued a fatwa, a religious decision that said that men should not hit their wives. Well, I believe that's the way we should work. If we're going to end violence against women, we've got to reach out to men right across the social and political spectrum. So what that means is, yes, find allies, find men, and of course women that you can get support from and work with if you happen to be in a hostile environment. But also find at least some ways you connect up with the men in your workplace, in your school, to find at least some connections, even if it's not the big connection you would like. A couple more questions. How did I come to do this? I think there was a question, more of a personal connection. It's funny. When I started, co-founded the White Ribbon Campaign back in 1991, was that 30 years ago, 40, whatever that was, ages ago, 30 years ago. And when Benno and I first met many, many years ago, I don't even know how long, but a long time ago. We were in kindergarten, ages ago. Anyway, the questions all often come up, why did I do this work? And people assumed I must have come from a background where I experienced abuse or my father was abusive. It was actually the opposite. My father was a gentle and loving man. Yes, I lived in a traditional home where he went out, left home for work. My mother worked in the home as a housewife. But there were very strong ideals of gender equality. And I didn't even know until I was a young adult, actually, that there was actually such a thing as violence against women, because it wasn't talked about in society. And so I didn't come to this work because of the experiences of violence. It was actually the opposite. I came to it because of experiences of love and respect, seeing my mom respected by my father and vice versa. But also understanding, I came to the work because as my women friends, when I reached university, began to challenge me as a man to speak out against sexism, to speak out against inequality, to speak out for women's rights. And I realized I had a responsibility to do that. And part of that was speaking out specifically against violence against women. And that's sort of an unplanned way, but that's how I ended up as a writer and a speaker and an advocate. I taught university for a number of years and then left that so I could focus on both volunteer work and paid work in this, to promote gender equality and end violence against women. Benno, was there a question about the white ribbon specifically that came next? Was there another question that I'm missing?
No, I think no.
Okay. Do we have time for any more questions?
Yes. Hay muchísimas preguntas, Michael, y tenemos...
There are many questions, Michael, and we have 13 minutes. I will try to summarize some of them. One is the role of women to push this gender equality in a country where the president and how specific it is in a country where the president harasses women and or not harasses women, but he violates women. So what's your personal recommendation to face chauvinist, anti-feminist, ultra-conservative, and supremacist discourse? Well, we are listening to that in Mexico. Monse Serrano, how to increase in an emphatic way to live your life when socially we are oriented towards competition more than cooperation and care. Lucero Jimenez from UNAM, what are strategies to beat the resistance of men in the university, alumni, professors, workers that feel threatened and don't understand why we struggle for building gender equality? One last one is, what happens? How can we understand that there are women that have a high role and they act as chauvinist men that exert power and passive violence and microaggression? Armando Diaz, how have you involved men that don't understand the reports of women if they feel? There are a little more, but understand that we are more than 1,000 people connected here on Zoom, through Facebook and through YouTube. Would you have 8-9 minutes to do that job as you've done?
Well, I think I'm going to do those in some sort of order. Let's go through those. There was a question toward the end about women who, I think if I understood it correctly, sort of who act in I guess you could say some of the same ways that some men act. That's because we have a system. It's called patriarchy. So when women enter into the system of power that is patriarchy, as heads of business, as in positions of power, it's not about your, what genital organs you have. It's about the social role we're playing. And so just like men can play the social role of being dominant, women can play that too. So this is not a biological critique of men, of males. It's a social critique of certain practices of domination and control. And women can learn how to do those negative things as well as men. That's why ultimately feminism is about transformation, transforming not just men and women, but our relations of social and political and economic power. What strategies in a university to reach other students, alumni, the administration, faculty who are hostile or resistant? Well, I think that's a really important question. And I think it starts with figure out ways. First of all, we have to start by listening. We have to start by listening to what they say. Sometimes if I'm speaking anywhere, but at a university, someone will get up and they'll just attack me with this and that. What I will do is find the one thing I agree with. And I'll start off by saying, I totally agree with your point about blah, 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 blah. And then I'll make connections back to the other points. My job isn't to humiliate other people. My job isn't to make other people feel stupid. My job is to make connections. So for me, with those people who are hostile, I figure my job is to figure out ways to connect to them, to disarm them, to allow them to realize that they can actually listen to the voices of women, listen to what I'm saying. The person asked the question used the phrase, how do we reach, those men who feel threatened? This is key. They feel threatened. I can tell you how not to reach people who feel threatened. We don't reach people who feel threatened by threatening them more if they have power, because those men already have power. So if they feel threatened, they're going to use their power to push back. So I think what we need to do, and this is not, I'm not talking about taking on the state. I'm talking about those individual discussions in a classroom or a meeting. My job isn't to threaten the men who disagree with me. My job is to make connections, to find the one thing that he says that I can connect with, that I can show that I actually understand and I sympathize and I empathize with things that he may be feeling. And then say, if you want to achieve X, Y, and Z in Mexico and in your life, that's why we need societies of quality. I say to a father, don't you want your daughter to live a life free of violence? Don't you want your friends and your wife to be able to experience equality in their workplace, on and on, to find ways to connect, not to show that I'm smarter or stronger or better. I don't want to threaten those men. I want to figure out ways to connect with my brothers. Because for the simple reason, if we're getting into threats, those who control the patriarchal state have way more power than we do. They control the state. They control the army. They control the police. They control the lawmaking. So we've got to be much smarter than them. So just, saying we're going to threaten them, it's not going to get us very far. But if we can figure out smart ways to connect and build our networks of allies, I want to find language that makes it clear to a conservative man why he needs to speak out against violence against women. He and I are going to disagree on feminism. He and I are going to disagree on climate change and many things. But I want to find ways to connect with him so he will speak out against violence against women. Threatening him is not going to get me anywhere. It makes me feel good, maybe, but it's not going to bring about change. A few quick ones. There should have been a question about how, Michael, you can have better handwriting. How to increase something.
It may be the one on men's rights movements.
Tal vez sea sobre los.
How to sort of live with different values? Is that
the men who are openly anti-feminists?
Oh, I see. Okay, let me be very clear. I want to make connections, but there are some men I'm not going to try to convince. I have to figure out if I go into a meeting, like into a classroom, and there's one guy who's just ranting and raving against women and feminism, my first job is not to connect with that man. That's my very last job. My job is to connect with all the other men, or at least some of the other men. And think of it this way. There's going to be a group of men who are going to be, on the fence. And then there's going to be this one guy who's like this total anti-feminist man. So what I've got to figure out is how I can get to, not necessarily get to him, but first I'll get to these men who are open to a discussion, and then get to these men in the middle who might be drawn to his argument or might be drawn to a discussion about equality. And to do that, we use our own cultural language. We might use religious language that talks about the kingdom of heaven on earth. We might use the language of the Mexican Revolution and the idea of equality and controlling our own destiny. We might use the language of love, whatever it takes. My job is not to connect up with that, the guy who's just the misogynist. My job is to connect up with those who I can win over. And so I reach out. So even if I'm answering him, I'm going to answer him with thoughtfulness and respect, not because I'm going to win him over, but I want to win over the people that might be attracted to him, the men who might be attracted to him. So it has a lot to do with not showing off, look how great I am and how feminist I am, but how much I'm caring, I'm listening, I'm thoughtful, I'm nurturing, I'm respectful. It means modeling, engaging with respect. It's hard to do at times. There are times when I just want to just yell at that guy and tell him, you are, just a misogynist, sexist creep. But sometimes it's good just ignore him and just worry about connecting. There's also the question about what was the first question? The role of women who push. What was that first question, Benno?
Who agree with gender equity and the work with men.
So the role of women in relation to men?
Mm-hmm. And towards gender equity.
But the role of women?
The incorporation of men towards gender equity.
Oh, I see. Okay. So in the women's movement, whether in Mexico or in Canada or around the world, there are women who pursue different strategies for pursuing feminism, gender equality, gender equity. Some say clearly they aren't interested in working with men. They want to develop their own institutions. I think men should respect that. Of course, we should. There are women who want to develop partnerships with individual men and groups of men. So it's, first of all, it's not up to men to say how women should or should not do their work. I think that within our organizations, there's times when it's important just to have men speaking out. There's times when it's important just to have men speaking to other men. But where possible, I think we should work in partnership. Many of the white ribbon campaigns around the world are campaigns that are run jointly by women and men, even though the goal is to speak to men. They're really run as partnerships. Some of them are more sort of focused on male leadership, but that's, there's different ways of doing that. But I think that the thing is to find ways to work together with respect. But I can certainly say that as a man working in this space, it has to start with listening. It has to start with men listening with respect. As I said before, not assuming that what one individual woman says is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, but because men have controlled our public discourse, to turn that around means that men have got to start by listening to the diverse voices of women, learning from those diverse voices of women. And that becomes our basis, I think, for successful work. Work with respect, work with humility, work with courage, work not to prove we're different or heroes, but work to really connect with our brothers. I remember early on, it was about 1980, long time ago, I went to my first workshop on issues around men and masculinity. It was a whole week retreat. It was out in the country. And we were driving home, and I saw a group of men, and they were just fit the stereotype. They were crowded around a car, and the hood of the car was up, and they were looking under the hood at the car engine. It was just like, it was a stereotype. I turned to the man next to me. I was feeling so good about myself going to this, feminist workshop about men and masculinity. I said something derisive and dismissive about those men out there. I put them down. And he looked at me and he said, Michael, those men are your brothers. Your job isn't to feel better than them. Your job isn't to feel superior to them. Your job is to connect with them. And to do that, you've got to listen to their concerns. You've got to listen to what they say, but also what they don't say. And you've got to find the language and the means and the compassion to connect with people, even when you disagree with them. And I'm not saying that I don't criticize those men. Of course I will. Of course I'm going to speak out publicly. I've been talking a lot about connecting with men. I'm going to also speak out. If the leader of my country makes statements against women or feminism, I'm going to speak out against him. If the leader of my country puts up barricades against women organizing, I'm going to speak out against that. I'm going to join my sisters. Absolutely. So I want to be clear on that. This is not about just, we can all be nice to each other. But this is about being smart, about allies, but it's also about demanding our brothers, about saying to men, particularly men in positions of power, you have a responsibility. We say to our presidents and prime ministers, if they are male, you have a responsibility to represent 100%, not just 50% of the population. You have a responsibility to speak out against the physical and sexual and emotional abuse of women. You have a responsibility to make sure that when your presidency ends, where prime ministership ends, that we are some steps closer to wage equality between women and men, to ending violence against women, to making sure that all women have the right to control their body, have full abortion rights. You have a responsibility to make sure we're bringing in new laws and measures to ensure that fathers are beginning to do an equal share of parenting and domestic work. You have a responsibility to ensure that people with diverse sexual orientations are respected and are free and are celebrated and are cherished as our brothers and sisters and those who don't define themselves within that gender binary. So we challenge our leaders. We don't just say, oh, we all can be nice to each other. We challenge each other. We speak out. We demand change, but we do it with smarts. We do it with love in our heart. We do it with a sense that none of us have sort of made it to some, utopia in our own lives. We do it knowing that we screw up. We do it knowing that we live contradictions. Of course. But finding ways to do it with love and compassion and strength. And the way we do that is to take inspiration. Yes, historically from our brothers, but particularly in this moment, inspiration from the women who have led the struggles for gender equality and women's rights, who have worked against incredible odds all over the world to bring about a society and societies of diversity, of respect, of gender equity, of gender equality. And we do it for those 10 women every day in Mexico whose lives are shed at the hands of a man because we're not there yet. But I want to say we can get there. I want to say that the reason why we are here for this conference is because, not because of mourning, but because of the strength of the women's movement who has pushed us to be here, the strength of men to join our sisters and to join those who don't define themselves within a gender binary, our capacity as women and men and others to stand together arm in arm, to speak with diverse voices at times, but with one voice together, to say that we all deserve lives free of the narrow constraints of gender binaries. We all deserve lives free of gender-based violence. We deserve lives where we can celebrate who we are. We deserve lives, and if we struggle together, if we struggle hard, if we embrace each other with love and connection and challenge, we can achieve that. And not in hundreds of years, but for some of those taking part in this conversation, we can achieve that in our lifetimes. I want to thank you. Muchas gracias a todos, a todas, for this work, for your initiative, for your leadership, for your work in the days ahead. I love you all. Muchas gracias a todos, a todas.
Muchas gracias a ti, Michael Kaufman, por esta inspiradora conferencia. Es realmente tremendo. Gracias. Hace poco en un taller sobre no violencia se hablaba de actuar con audacia y humildad. Y creo que a eso nos estás invitando para involucrar a más en nuestras comunidades en diferentes niveles. El tiempo se nos ha acabado, hay más preguntas. Agradezco mucho a las más de 1000 personas que nos han venido acompañando en las distintas plataformas. Agradezco a los rectores y rectoras que mandaron sus mensajes y a la gente de las diferentes universidades que han venido participando, a las 7 universidades, también las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, al gran equipo de la Coordinación para la Igualdad de Género de la UNAM, que ha sido un trabajo de muchas semanas en este esfuerzo que con tu conferencia apunta a convocar a cada vez más hombres hacia la igualdad de género, buscando no solo mejor vida para las mujeres, sino también para los propios hombres en nuestras comunidades. Quisiera recordar rápidamente que esta es la primera de muchas actividades durante 6 semanas. También por Facebook y por YouTube. Michael, thank you very much. Un abrazo from Mexico.
Gracias.
Thank you for your inspiration.
Gracias.